welcome back to another episode of Ask 360, where we're answering all your questions related to health, fitness, rehabilitation, injury, and nutrition. Today, we're going to take a little bit of a different format, and we're going to do a group answer to this question. So we're here on the back end of our physiotherapy in-service, and we're going to get the whole team's input on this question. And we'll at least hear from our very popular osteopath, Max Hopes, but we might also get some input from our athletic trainer, Oshin McPartland, and we may also hear from physiotherapist John Barker, who may or may not be on a train. So we're going to get started. Today's question comes from Barry. And Barry asks, what are the best ways to correct bad posture? Now, this is a very sort of broad question, and we obviously get a lot of questions regarding posture in the clinic. And I thought we would actually, I think to answer this question properly or give it the full attention that it deserves, we'd break it down into 5 parts, into 5 sort of mini questions. And those would be, the first one is, what do we mean by posture and what do we mean by bad posture? I guess there's 2 questions there. What do we mean by correcting posture? Why do we want to correct posture? Can we correct posture? And the last one, if so, how? Right. So we might start with what do we mean by posture? Max, what are your thoughts on that?
So I guess the general idea is the way that you're holding your body. You could break that into like static postures when you're staying in one position, whether that's when you're sat down or standing or whatever, or dynamic postures when you're actually moving around, and that's how you kind of hold yourself when you're actually doing movements. In terms of bad posture, I guess we have like the classic one that people will think of if they're talking about bad posture is slumping forward with the shoulders when they're sat down or stood up, and letting the head kind of fall forward. So kind of referring to it as bad posture is a bit of a term that would be debated a little bit more these days. The research around posture and pain basically doesn't show that there's a real like strong correlation between posture and pain in the way that you might think. So it's a little bit more of a more complex question than you might think. So we've kind of moved away from demonizing postures and blaming everything on bad postures. Sometimes it's easy when someone comes in and they do have that kind of round-shouldered kind of position and they might have some neck or back pain or something, just to blame it on that. But I think these days we take a little bit more of a more rounded view on posture, and it's a bit more complicated than you might think.
Yeah, so I think you've gone ahead and tried to answer all 5 questions there, so well done. But yeah, absolutely, you got that sort of dynamic and static posture. I think the other thing that I'd add is, and also we're often talking about upper body, but also the lower body. We can think about what's been described before as that sort of lower cross syndrome, where you have the pelvis sort of tilted forwards, that sort of arch in the back, and then the opposite where you've got that sort of posterior pelvic tilt where you're sort of tucked in the other way. I guess what I'd also add is that sometimes we're not really clear when we talk about posture whether it's actually something that's under sort of active control, whether it's the actual way that we're holding ourselves, or whether posture's actually something that's an anatomical thing. So, for example, your posture could be determined by the actual sort of length and strength around certain structures, and something that is actually an unconscious thing, right? So it's just sort of the way that the position that you're in. So from that then, what do we mean by correcting posture? What does that actually mean for us as health professionals, and what do we think that it means for our clients and patients? I would, again, look at that in different ways. I think that some people would think of correcting posture as having active control over the way that we're either sitting or standing or moving. or we can actually, try to use interventions to actually change alignment and sort of change resting alignment and maybe even sort of change the way that alignment impacts on our movements. Has anyone else got any other thoughts on that? Max or anyone else?
Yeah, I think like the most classic one that I see is just kind of what I was referring to before, where someone they have like the kind of slump position and they want to bring the shoulders back or whatever. Like that would be the most classic one. You do see like you kind of alluded to yourself there a little bit as well. People will talk about like posterior and anterior pelvic tilt and how that might have an effect on back pain and things like that. So we'll often get people asking how to correct those kind of postures.
Yeah. So I think sort of being more upright, being straighter, being less hunched, those are the type of things that people think about when they think about correcting posture. I think if you take an anatomy book and look at how the spine should be in an anatomy book, I think people they feel that they should look like that that's how they should stand or sit or move. Any other thoughts on that? Cool. We'll go on to next. Why do we want to correct posture? So I think, Max, you talked before about posture and pain, and how some people may want to correct posture because they are suffering pain and they believe that will actually help with an injury. I guess the other side is more of a preventative thing. So some people may want to prevent the pain. And so, with both of those things, like you said, there's not a strong correlation between pain and posture within the research. So like you were saying, Max, there's not a great correlation between pain and posture. So whilst people may try to change their posture in the belief that it'll actually prevent pain, that may not always be the best strategy. A few other things too. We may want to improve posture to improve aesthetics. So, you could look at someone and see that they're hunched and maybe think that that's not the best look. It may not promote sort of confidence and things like that. So you may want to improve your posture just to have a more commanding, confident presence. So say if you were speaking or if you're in a meeting or even just sort of conducting any sort of interaction, it may be looked at as being advantageous to have more of that posture. We've sort of talked about pain a little bit, but not so much performance. Sometimes if it's thought that if you are in a better position, either statically or dynamically, to perform an athletic task, that you may have a better ability to produce better force or produce force for longer being in that position. So that's maybe another reason that we might want to adjust our posture or improve our posture. Another reason I've got down here is to make a parent or a partner stop complaining about your posture. This is a real thing. So people will come in saying, "Oh, my wife always tells me that I've got really bad posture," and we may be trying to correct that just to get that other person to stop complaining about it. I guess the real issue is, why does your wife or partner or mother or father think that you need to change your posture? And I think that in particular cases, we may need to get to the bottom of that. Any other reasons that we can think of that why people might want to actually change their posture?
So I was going to pick up on two of those ones that you picked up on yourself there in terms of like aesthetics and performance. So yeah, I think you covered that quite well already. Like one more thing on the performance thing is like with certain postures maybe comes like limited range of motion and stuff like that as well. Like let's come back again to that like slumped kind of position that can sometimes be associated with stiffness in your mid back and your thoracic spine. And like just as an example, that might kind of limit your overhead range of motion, stuff like that. So can definitely have an impact on performance. I think you covered that quite well already.
That's a good one though. I mean, if you are doing something athletic, but you're spending a lot of your time at a desk, Maybe sitting with that hunch posture is leading to some range of motion restrictions that may be relevant to an athletic task. And then I guess the knock-on effect of that may be an increase in the likelihood of injury as a result of
Yeah.
that, or decrease.
Yeah, definitely. And then coming back again to pain, which I know we've discussed a bit already, and we're kind of saying that there isn't as much of a definite link to pain as we might have previously suspected, or as a lot of people might think. But that's not to say that it's sometimes not relevant. So like if I'm thinking of changing someone's posture, one of the reasons why I might think to do that would be if there's a clear association between like when this person is slumping over and hunching, that's when their pain comes on. And in that situation, it does make sense, obviously, to try to modify that posture, even if doesn't have to be a long-term thing, at least to allow their symptoms to settle down. But that one can work the opposite way as well, where like you might get some people whose pain is related to constantly trying to sit upright and trying too hard to almost hold what they would perceive as a good posture. And in that situation, you might just advise that person it's okay to relax a little bit more. It's okay, not to slump all day, but to slump at certain times, or just to not be quite so hard on themselves with their posture. And that kind of feeds into something that we haven't discussed too much yet, but I don't know if you're going to get a bit more to this in terms of like the variation of postures through the day, which is also like that's something that we kind of push people towards a lot these days, I think.
Yeah, for sure. We'll get onto that in a second. We'll sort of, I guess, after we've gone through those questions, we'll sort of talk about maybe interventions of how we can go about that. Can we change posture is sort of the next question. I think that there's a fairly strong narrative that we can't change posture. And I think the studies that refers to are when we're trying to actually change position. So if we're doing like a stretching or strengthening program for either the upper body and the lower body, and we're measuring the actual angle of the scapula, the shoulder blade, or the pelvis at rest, can we change that position, long term or long to mid term, which I'll actually touch on in a second, through training interventions? And the research has suggested that we can't. Now, a couple of things with that. Those studies have been relatively short studies. So even a 3-month intervention is a relatively short study. And also, to my knowledge, they've been done in adult populations. So I do think that the older you are, the harder it is to make those changes. But I do think that when you're younger, both your nervous system and your bodies, the tissues in your body, they're both more plastic than if you're older. So I think that if for a younger person, you may have the capacity to change. But as you get older, that becomes more and more difficult. Now, can you change your posture from like a neuromuscular perspective? Okay. What did I just do then? I changed my posture. Okay. All I did was sit differently. So absolutely, you're able to change the way that you sit or stand or move. To make that more of a habitual thing is definitely harder. And I think that, telling someone I'll sit up straight is not always going to be an effective solution. However, I don't think that's necessarily problematic if we're talking about, like you said, Max, in terms of an intervention. If we want people to have more variation in their posture, then getting someone to sit up every 30 minutes and then, knowing full well that they'll probably just, creep back into that, quote unquote bad posture, is not such a bad thing. We're just providing a little bit more variation. I also think that changing the external environment can be effective in changing posture as well. So if you raise your the height of your monitor, for example, you change the position of your seat, you change the position of the chair, that is going to force you, or not force you, but is going to encourage you just to try and bring your body in line with the external environment. That is going to change your posture as well. And I guess just going back to what you touched on before, Max, if we associate someone's pain coming on with a certain change in posture, that may be a reason that we go into that intervention. We can also do what we call as a symptom modification. So if we test someone's neck range of motion, say they have pain looking to the left and it's quite stiff, and then we get them into another posture and they have far less pain, then again, we may attribute the posture to being more relevant to that particular person. And then we can change their external environment so that they're more inclined to sit in a certain way. That's going to positively impact their area of sensitivity. Another way would be what I like to do, changing someone's sitting position, is having them just sit on different points of the hip. So instead of sitting on that round, the rounder part of the buttocks, the area between the sit bones and the tailbone, we might actually get someone to sit on the sit bones so that then they're relaxing back into their chair. I call it the sit bone sit. I know Diane Lee, who I sort of got this type of theory from, calls it the booty scoot, because you're actually pulling your butt back and trying to actually tilt the pelvis forward as you do that to get more of the weight on the sit bones. And then by doing that, it actually makes it easier to sit up a little straighter without that effort. Max, what you described before, I think when people are sitting on that area between the coccyx and the tailbone, and they think, oh, no, I should be sitting up straight. To actually sit up straight, you need to contract your back muscles and all your hip flexors to get you into that position. And then if people are trying to hold that position for a long period of time, it can actually cause some fatigue and soreness in those muscles. So again, sitting on a different part of the hips is changing that external environment to then change posture. The other thing too is that, yes, so let's say we're trying to improve posture through the upper body, stretching for the front of the shoulders and maybe strengthening for the muscles at the back, especially in the past, had been prescribed as a way of changing posture. Now, those exercises have been prescribed to a lot of patients in the past and have had successful outcomes, even though we know that they're unlikely to have changed that posture. So what does that mean? There's still some value in those type of exercises. You alluded to, Max, that the change in range of motion. If we stretch the front of our shoulders, we know that we're going to get long-term changes in range of motion over time. So that may just allow us to have more variation with our position. So instead of moving our shoulders through 20 degrees, we're now moving them through 25 degrees. And we know that variation in movement and posture is always good. The other thing, if we're doing strength training or endurance training for the muscles at the back, Max, this is obviously your bread and butter, but we're increasing load through that area and we're giving that area the capacity to tolerate. So say if this posture is causing some stress through, say, the muscles in the neck and the muscles in the back, if we're increasing those muscles' capacity to tolerate load and we're using exercise to desensitize them, then you're likely to be having less of that sort of overload-related pain. What do you think? I'm assuming you're going to agree with me there, but have you got anything else to add on top of that?
No, I think you pretty much covered most of the stuff I was going to say. Just so I'm probably repeating your points a little bit here, but just coming back kind of to something you said in terms of like doing the stretching exercise, doing those strengthening exercises that have been traditionally prescribed. Like if you can give yourself the ability to hold different postures by getting stronger or by gaining more range of motion in relevant areas, then that gives you another option. So like if we're talking about having that kind of variability again, like you do see some people who they're just so stiff in their thoracic spine or wherever it may be that it's really difficult for them to actually hold a different posture. Whereas if you work on those kind of exercises, work on your range of motion in your thoracic spine, your neck, open up the chest muscles, get stronger in those back muscles, then you've actually got the ability to go into a different posture, and that does give you that option. And so that is, they do still have relevance in that way. And yeah, as you said, I'm certainly a big believer in just building that capacity of those tissues to tolerate that kind of load, which I think in itself is probably a big reason why they work as well.
Yeah, for sure. I guess it's sort of just understanding also the difference between kinematics and kinetics. Now, we're probably getting a little bit too scientific for what Barry was after, but if you are in this position, you may have changed your kinetics, which is what's actually going on in the muscles there, without changing the kinematics. So the kinematics is actually the position, and sometimes that may get a little lost, or as a concept that's not perhaps as well understood. So, yeah, I think I'm getting to question 5, and I think we've covered that off. The how do we go about changing posture? We've sort of talked a little bit about interventions in terms of varying posture, and then sort of changing the external environment. I think that going back to what we talked about in terms of that social element of a biopsychosocial model of pain. If you have had your parents just harping on you for years and years, sit up straight, you've got bad posture, and then you start to get a little bit of back pain, and then you go on Dr. Google, and back pain can be caused by posture, and it's like, oh, my parents were right, I've had this bad posture my whole life. Then that can potentially be damaging, and that can sort of feed into someone's fear of movement, and then that can maybe lead to some of the less, that suboptimal strategies you were describing before, Max, where someone will actually try to sit up straight and try and hold that position, and then create another problem because they're overusing muscles in which they don't have the capacity. They're actually, creating tension in those muscles and getting themselves into a bit of a vicious cycle. So I think that, important things to understand is that, we shouldn't really consider anything as being a bad posture or a good posture. Variety is key. For some people, certain postures may be related to the onset of pain. For others, they may not be related to the onset of pain, but they may be providing a slightly suboptimal environment for tissues to heal or for sensitivity to be decreased. And in that case, yes, there's a place for some postural modification. But I think that for in a lot of situations, creating sort of bad self-image around postures is not really the direction that we want to be heading. Those are sort of my closing thoughts. Max, have you got anything else to add there?
Just one more thing in terms of like practical takeaways for people, like just the simple advice that I give out to people, which we've discussed before in different contexts, is just like the movement snack type things. So like for people who are sat down for long periods of the day, well, firstly, just breaking that up. So if you do have the option to use like standing desks and stuff like that, having some variation in the way that you're holding yourself through the day is good in itself. And then just using like really basic movement exercises as little ways just to keep yourself moving through the day. These are my kind of go-to kind of management strategies for people who are getting pain that's related to them sitting down all day. So just, it doesn't have to be anything complicated, but just some simple stretching, mobility exercises just kind of sprinkled in through the day for literally a minute or two at a time, but kind of repeating that a few times through the day.
Perfect. All right. Anything else? 2, 1. Well, thank you very much for your input there, Max. Barry, I hope hope that was helpful. We probably waffled on for a little bit too long there, but hopefully that answered your question in as much detail as we can answer at the moment. And again, thank you for your question. Any listeners, if you do have questions, please send them in, and we'll look forward to another sort of round table discussion on Ask 360. Thanks for listening, guys. Take care. Bye.